Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are going to objectively unpack one of Glasgow's absolutely most persistent, fascinating, and frankly, polarizing football narratives. We're talking about the Rangers establishment myth. This is a story where sports, history, and identity all just intensely collide, and we are going to break the whole shebang down step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. Is Rangers Football Club genuinely the literal manifestation of the British establishment? Or is that label just a massive projection of societal anxiety? We're going to frame our entire explanation around this central forensic question. Now, we aren't here to take sides or settle any local pub debates, right? We're just here to look at the source material, decode the sociology behind those stadium chants, and figure out what is actually driving this powerful narrative.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, the establishment myth. Second, the genesis of the narrative. Third, myth versus forensic reality. Number 4, the old firm dynamic. 5, modern power in football. And finally, 6, the myth as a mirror.
Section 1. The establishment myth. Defining the nexus.
So, to truly understand this old firm rivalry, we have to look way past the 90 minutes on the pitch and establish a really solid, neutral baseline. What does the establishment actually mean in this specific cultural context? Well, it's the perception of Rangers FC as the literal manifestation of British power structures. For generations, the club has been cast as being inextricably woven into the security services, the monarchy, and the entire political apparatus of the UK. It's not just about having wealthy owners, it's about a perceived, deep-rooted systemic power.
Section 2. Genesis of the narrative. Constructing the image.
So how did this specific image get constructed in the first place? It actually wasn't just a historical accident. It was a deliberate performance born in the early 20th century and really cultivated under their legendary manager, Bill Struth. First, they created a symbolic anchor, bringing the Union Jack, the monarchy, and staunchly pro-British narratives directly into the matchday experience. And this brilliantly illustrates how Rangers provided a focal point for fans who strongly identified with the British state, especially back during the peak of the empire. Then there's the institutional mirror. Because the club emphasized traditional values and strict discipline, they gained this perceived relationship with the police, the judiciary, and the political elite in both London and Edinburgh. To those looking from the outside, Rangers didn't just support the status quo. They literally were the status quo. Section 3. Myth versus forensic reality. Stripping away the emotion. All right, it's time to put aside the rhetoric for a second and compare that perception with the objective truth. The perception paints the club as having unique access to the levers of political power, acting as the ultimate shielded guardian of the establishment. The forensic reality, though? Well, it's marked by institutional autonomy. Rangers, honestly, much like their rivals, have frequently found themselves completely at odds with the actual establishment. Over the years, they faced intense institutional scrutiny, very public struggles with governing bodies, and a barrage of regulatory action over well-documented controversies regarding financial mismanagement. So in reality, they have often been the target of regulatory authorities rather than the shielded beneficiary of them. And that brings us to this absolutely crucial takeaway. A large part of the establishment myth is actually a form of identity projection. Because Rangers so publicly claims British Unionism as their core identity, they are often held accountable by rivals for the actions, the policies, and the perceived biases of the British state itself. And here's the kicker. This happens regardless of whether the football club has any actual agency, input, or involvement in those state affairs. They essentially function as a proxy. Section 4. The old firm dynamic, the us versus them dichotomy. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth does this myth survive if it completely conflicts with the forensic reality we just looked at? Well, it's because both sides of the rivalry actively use it for a really powerful psychological function. For the Celtic fanbase, framing Rangers as the establishment creates this incredibly compelling underdog versus the system dynamic. It literally transforms being a fan into an act of resistance. Beating Rangers isn't just winning a game of football. It's a symbolic triumph against the weight of this system. Conversely, for the Rangers fan base, the label acts as a defensive shield. That establishment tag is often worn as a badge of absolute pride. It acknowledges their alignment with the UK constitutional status quo and cements their sense of belonging to a much larger historical national narrative. So you see, both sides distinctly need the myth to cement their own ideological stakes.
Section 5. Modern power in football. The real 2026 establishment.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it visually debunks the idea of local political power.
The idea that a local Glasgow football club holds systemic political power today, it fundamentally misunderstands how global power works. Just look at the real drivers here: capital, media influence, and globalized marketing. To call any Scottish club the establishment in the modern era is kind of missing the big picture. The real 2026 establishment is made up of multinational boards of directors, private equity firms, and state-backed sports funds. Global capital is the new power, not historical municipal alliances.
Yet despite that globalized financial reality we just talked about, the myth persists simply because it is just so incredibly useful. It anchors the rivalry in a history that feels significantly larger than 90 minutes on a Saturday afternoon. It elevates a sport, right? It turns a football match into a sweeping, massive debate about the United Kingdom, the legacy of Ireland, and the deeply rooted nature of social power in Scotland.
Section 6. The myth as a mirror reflecting societal anxieties.
This entire dynamic is like a giant mirror, brilliantly showing us how we construct our own realities through a simple three-step process. This is the core of how institutions are turned into proxies for societal grievances. Step 1. An identity is asserted, in this case, Rangers embracing British Unionism early in their history. Step 2. That identity becomes an object. The club is no longer just a sports team, it's a symbol. And step 3, that object is shaped, sharpened, and used by others to define their own place in the world. We literally need our rivals to represent a specific identifiable power structure so we have something clear to push against.
As our source text so powerfully notes, the story of Rangers and the British state is ultimately a story of how an identity, once asserted, becomes an object that can be shaped, sharpened, and used by others. And you know what? Whether the football club ever truly was the establishment, or ever even could be, is almost entirely beside the point. As long as this myth provides a reliable lens for fans to define who they are and where they stand, it's going to continue to exist.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. As the game becomes ever more globalized and disconnected from local politics, do modern fans actually separate the club's symbolic identity from its literal lack of political power? Or is this establishment myth so deeply culturally entrenched that it can never be dismantled by historical facts? It's a fascinating question about the stories we choose to believe and why we need them. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the narratives around you, and I will see you next time.